You have one chance. Play perfectly or lose everything.
The gymnasium fell silent as the gleaming Steinway grand piano rolled to center stage, its polished black surface catching the lights like liquid glass. A man in a designer suit stood beside it, his pen hovering over a check made out for $2 million. At the piano bench sat a 14-year-old boy, his worn sneakers barely touching the floor, his fingers trembling above the keys. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. Every eye in that room was on him. Every camera. Every phone. The man leaned down, his voice carrying across the dead silence. You have one chance. Play perfectly or lose everything. The boy's hands shook harder. In the crowd, students held their breath. Faculty members gripped their seats. And somewhere in the back, a mother closed her eyes and prayed. But to understand how we got here, to this impossible moment, we need to go back. 48 hours earlier. Jayden Williams' alarm clock screamed at 4:45 in the morning, the same time it did every single day. In the darkness of the two-bedroom apartment in the East Side projects, the 14-year-old boy dragged himself out of bed, careful not to wake his little sister Zara, who slept in the bottom bunk. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city waking up outside their window. Jayden was a freshman at Ashford Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. He was also one of only 3 black students in the entire school. But that's not what made him different. What made Jayden different was that he didn't belong there. Not in the way the other students belonged. Not with their family names on buildings and their parents' cars worth more than his entire apartment complex. Jayden was a scholarship student. A charity case, as some of the other kids liked to remind him. He moved through his morning routine like a ghost. First, he laid out clothes for Zara, her favorite purple shirt and the jeans that didn't have holes in the knees. Then he made her lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, the same thing every day because it was cheap and it was filling. He left a note on the counter for his mother, who wouldn't be home for another hour. Mom, don't forget Zara has a doctor's appointment at 3. Love you. His mother, Angela Williams, worked 3 jobs. 3. She was a nursing assistant at the county hospital from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. On weekends, she waitressed at a diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. And 3 nights a week, she stocked shelves at the grocery store from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Jayden couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his mother get a full night's sleep. It had been this way for 4 years, ever since his father died. James Williams had been a construction worker, a good man who worked hard and loved his family. One day, a scaffolding collapsed. Just like that, he was gone. And he left behind medical bills, funeral costs, and a family drowning in debt. Jayden grabbed his backpack, a worn thing with a broken zipper held together by safety pins, and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. 2 buses. That's what it took to get from the East Side projects to Ashford Academy. 90 minutes each way. He did this journey every single day. On the first bus, he sat in the back and pulled out his homework, trying to finish calculus problems while the bus lurched and stopped, lurched and stopped. On the second bus, the one that traveled through neighborhoods that got progressively nicer, he stared out the window at the houses getting bigger, the lawns getting greener, the cars getting more expensive. He arrived at Ashford Academy at 7:15, 45 minutes before first period. The building looked like a castle, all stone and columns and manicured gardens. It was beautiful. It was intimidating. And every single day Jayden felt like an intruder. His uniform didn't quite fit right. It was from the thrift store, the previous owner's name still faintly visible on the tag inside the collar. The pants were a little too short. The shirt was a little too big. The blazer had a small stain on the sleeve that he tried to scrub out but couldn't quite erase. The other students didn't have these problems. They had tailored uniforms replaced every year. They had designer backpacks and the latest phones and AirPods that cost more than Jayden's monthly grocery budget. But Jayden had something they didn't have. Something he kept secret, hidden, protected like a fragile treasure. Jayden Williams could play piano. He'd taught himself. Every day after school, instead of going straight home, he'd stop at the East Side Community Center where Reverend Thompson let him use the old upright piano in the basement. It was a beaten-up thing, half the keys stuck, completely out of tune, with scratches and water stains covering its wooden surface. But to Jayden it was everything. He'd learned from YouTube videos, watching concert pianists perform, slowing down the videos to see where their fingers went, teaching his own hands to move the same way. He'd learned to read music from free PDFs he downloaded at the library. He practiced until his fingers ached, until Reverend Thompson had to kick him out to close up for the night. Jayden dreamed of Juilliard, the most prestigious music school in the world. He'd never told anyone, not even his mother. It seemed ridiculous. Kids like him didn't go to Juilliard. Kids like him were supposed to be grateful for what they had and not reach for things that seemed impossible. But when Jayden sat at that broken piano, when his fingers touched those keys, he wasn't a scholarship student or a charity case or a kid from the projects. He was a musician. And for those few hours he could be anything. At school though, he was invisible. He ate lunch alone in the corner of the cafeteria, usually just a sandwich he brought from home while other students bought gourmet meals from the school's catering service. He kept his head down in the hallways. He didn't raise his hand in class, even when he knew the answer, because drawing attention to himself only invited trouble. The other students treated him like he didn't exist. They looked through him, talked around him, acted like he was a piece of furniture. And honestly, that was better than the alternative. Because when they did notice him, it usually meant something bad was about to happen. Now, let me tell you about the man who was about to change everything. Vincent Ashford III was 58 years old and worth $4.7 billion. Billion. With a B. He was a tech mogul, third-generation wealth, a man who had never worked a real job in his entire life. He'd inherited his grandfather's company, grown it with other people's ideas and other people's labor, and now he spent his time collecting things. Vincent collected rare instruments the way some people collected stamps. He owned 47 pianos. 47. Including one that had belonged to Mozart himself, which he kept in a climate-controlled room in his mansion and never, ever played. To Vincent Ashford, everything was a transaction. Everything had a price. Everything was either an investment or entertainment. People weren't human beings with dreams and struggles and hopes. They were numbers, assets, or liabilities. Ashford Academy was named after Vincent's grandfather, who'd founded the school 70 years ago. Vincent sat on the board, donated millions every year, and basically owned the place. What he said went. Who he wanted hired got hired. Who he wanted gone disappeared. Recently, Vincent had been in the news for all the wrong reasons. His company faced accusations of discriminatory hiring practices. Multiple lawsuits. Bad press. His carefully crafted image as a philanthropist was cracking. So Vincent did what rich people always do when their reputation needs repair. He went on a philanthropy tour. Donations to charities, carefully staged photo opportunities, press releases about giving back to the community. All of it tax deductible. All of it calculated. And his next stop was Ashford Academy, where he planned to donate a brand new grand piano to the school's music program. A Steinway Model D, worth $175,000. The best piano money could buy. Of course, it wasn't really about the music. It was about the press coverage, the tax write-off, the image rehabilitation. Vincent's PR team had already contacted local news stations. This was going to be an event. Vincent had a son, Brandon, who was a senior at Ashford Academy. Brandon was everything you'd expect from a spoiled billionaire's kid. Cruel. Entitled. Convinced the world existed to serve him. He drove a BMW to school, wore a Rolex that cost more than most people's cars, and led a group of equally terrible students who spent their time making everyone else miserable. And Brandon's favorite target? Scholarship students. Especially Jayden. Principal Harrington was the kind of man who smiled too much and stood for nothing. He was terrified of upsetting donors, terrified of controversy, terrified of anything that might threaten his comfortable position. He practiced what he called professionalism, but what it really meant was looking the other way when rich students did terrible things and coming down hard on poor students for the smallest infractions. When Brandon and his friends harassed Jayden in the hallways, Principal Harrington didn't see it. When they tripped him, knocked books out of his hands, made racist jokes just loud enough for Jayden to hear, Principal Harrington was suddenly very busy with other matters. But there was one teacher who was different. Mrs. Chen had been teaching music at Ashford Academy for 40 years. She was 73 years old, a tiny woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd seen thousands of students come through her classroom, most of them mediocre, some of them talented, a handful truly gifted. And then there was Jayden Williams. She'd only heard him play once by accident. She'd stayed late one evening, going over sheet music in her classroom, when she heard someone at the piano in the practice room. She'd gone to investigate, ready to scold whichever student was there without permission, and found Jayden at the old upright, completely lost in the music. She'd stood in the doorway, frozen, listening. He was playing Chopin, a nocturne, and he was playing it wrong. His technique was self-taught and flawed. His posture was terrible. He was making mistakes that would make any trained pianist wince. But God, the emotion, the soul, the raw, natural talent. Mrs. Chen had never said anything to him about it. She'd quietly slipped away, leaving him to his music. But from that day forward, she'd watched him. She'd seen the way other students treated him. She'd seen him eating lunch alone. She'd seen the worn uniform, the tired eyes, the weight he carried. And she'd waited for the right moment. Jayden also had one friend at Ashford Academy. Just one. Malik was a sophomore, also on scholarship, a basketball player with dreams of going pro. He was tall, athletic, charismatic in a way that Jayden wasn't. Malik could navigate the social hierarchies of Ashford Academy better than Jayden could, but he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot what it was like to be the outsider. Malik and Jayden had bonded over being two of the only black students at the school. They had lunch together when Malik wasn't at basketball practice. They texted late at night, sharing frustrations and jokes and keeping each other sane. "Man, you gotta stand up for yourself," Malik would say. "These rich kids only respect you if you make them." But Jayden couldn't. He was too afraid. Afraid of losing his scholarship. Afraid of making things worse for his family. Afraid of proving everyone right who said he didn't belong there. And then there was Zara. Jayden's little sister was 9 years old and the light of his life. She was smart, funny, creative, and sick. Zara had been born with a chronic condition that required expensive medication, regular doctor's appointments, and careful monitoring. Without insurance, the medication alone would cost $3,000 a month. Angela worked herself to death to keep that insurance. To make sure Zara got her medication. To keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Jayden would do anything for his sister. Anything. Now, if you're enjoying this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This is going to be a journey and you won't want to miss what happens next. On this particular Wednesday morning, Jayden sat through his classes like he always did, quiet and invisible. First period English, second period history, third period calculus. The material was easy for him. Jayden was smart, smarter than most of the students at Ashford Academy, though they'd never believe it. Fourth period was lunch. Jayden found his usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria, pulled out his sandwich and tried to make himself as small as possible. Across the cafeteria, Brandon Ashford held court with his group of friends, laughing too loud, taking up too much space, making sure everyone knew he was the most important person in the room. Fifth period was music appreciation with Mrs. Chen. Jayden loved this class even though he never participated. He'd sit in the back and listen to her talk about composers, about music theory, about the way sound could tell stories and express emotions that words never could. Mrs. Chen would sometimes look at him during these lectures, a knowing look, like she was speaking directly to him. But she never called on him. Never put him on the spot. She seemed to understand that he needed to stay invisible. The announcement came during sixth period. Principal Harrington's voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention students and faculty. Tomorrow during fourth period, all students are required to report to the gymnasium for a special assembly. A very generous benefactor will be making a significant donation to our music program. Attendance is mandatory." Around Jayden, students groaned. Another assembly. Another chance for some rich person to pat themselves on the back. Jayden had no idea that this assembly would change his life forever. The next day, the gymnasium was transformed. A stage had been set up at one end with professional lighting and a sound system. News crews were setting up cameras. Faculty members were arranging chairs in neat rows. And in the center of it all, covered by an elegant black cloth, was something large and imposing. Students filed in, talking and laughing, not particularly interested in whatever this was about. Jayden found a seat in the back row, hoping to disappear into the crowd. Malik slid in next to him. "Bet you $20 this is boring as hell," Malik whispered. "I don't have $20, Jayden whispered back. "Exactly why I made the bet." The lights dimmed. Principal Harrington took the stage, his smile so wide it looked painful. "Students, faculty, members of the press, welcome. Today is a very special day for Ashford Academy. We have with us a man who needs no introduction, a pillar of our community, a visionary leader, and most importantly, a generous friend to education. Please join me in welcoming Vincent Ashford III. The applause was polite but unenthusiastic. Students clapped because they had to, not because they cared. Vincent Ashford strode onto the stage like he owned it. Which, in a way, he did. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Angela Williams made in 6 months. His smile was white and perfect and completely empty. "Thank you, Principal Harrington. Thank you all for being here." Vincent's voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone used to being listened to. "You know, my grandfather founded this academy 70 years ago with a simple belief, that education should cultivate excellence. That we should give our young people every tool they need to succeed." Jayden watched from the back row, feeling that familiar sense of not belonging. This man had never struggled a day in his life. Never wondered if he could afford lunch. Never took 2 buses to get somewhere. Never felt invisible. That's why I'm so thrilled to announce my latest contribution to this wonderful institution. Music is the soul of education. It teaches discipline, creativity, perseverance. And every student deserves access to the very best. With a dramatic gesture, Vincent pulled the black cloth away. Gasps echoed through the gymnasium. It was the most beautiful piano Jayden had ever seen. A Steinway Model D grand piano, 9 feet of gleaming black perfection. The stage lights caught its polished surface, making it glow like something from a dream. This, Vincent announced, his voice swelling with pride, is a Steinway Model D, valued at $175,000. And I'm donating it to Ashford Academy's music program. Now the applause was genuine. Students sat up straighter, impressed despite themselves. Teachers beamed. Cameras flashed. Jayden stared at the piano, his heart aching with longing. He'd never touched an instrument like that. The broken upright at the community center was barely functional. But this was what real pianists played. This was the kind of instrument that could make magic. Vincent continued his speech, talking about giving back and opportunities for all students and the importance of the arts. It was the same speech every rich person gave when they wanted credit for doing the bare minimum. But Jayden barely heard him. He was looking at that piano, imagining what it would sound like, what it would feel like to play something so perfect. Vincent reached his conclusion. And now, I'd like to invite any talented student to come up and christen this beautiful instrument. Show us what Ashford Academy's musicians can do. Silence fell over the gymnasium. No one moved. The music students looked at each other nervously. Playing in front of the whole school, the principal, news cameras, and a billionaire? That was terrifying. The silence stretched. Principal Harrington shifted uncomfortably. Vincent looked around, his smile becoming slightly fixed. Mrs. Chin, sitting in the faculty section, caught Jayden's eye. She gave him the tiniest nod, so small that anyone else would have missed it. Jayden's heart pounded. She wanted him to volunteer. She thought he could do it. But he couldn't. He couldn't get up in front of all these people. He couldn't draw that kind of attention to himself. What if he messed up? What if he proved everyone right, that scholarship students didn't belong here? His hands gripped the edge of his seat. And then from the front row, Brandon Ashford's voice rang out loud and mocking. What about the scholarship kid? Wonder if he even knows what a piano is. Laughter rippled through the student section. Cruel laughter. The kind that feels like knives. Jayden's face burned. Every eye turned toward the back row, students craning their necks to see who Brandon was talking about. Yeah, Jayden, right? Brandon continued, standing up now, playing to his audience. Doesn't he think he's special or something? More laughter. Louder now. Jayden wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. He wanted to be anywhere but here, with hundreds of eyes staring at him, judging him, laughing at him. Malik put a hand on his shoulder. Ignore them, man. They're just... But Vincent Ashford had noticed the commotion. His eyes, sharp and calculating, focused on Jayden in the back row. What's this? Vincent asked, his voice carrying across the gymnasium. A student who plays piano? Well, come on down, young man. Don't be shy. Jayden's hands clenched into fists. His face was hot with humiliation. His throat was tight. Every instinct screamed at him to stay in his seat, to shake his head, to let this moment pass. But something else was happening too. Something deeper than embarrassment. Anger, quiet but growing. These people had spent a year treating him like he was nothing. Like he didn't belong. Like he was less than them because he was poor, because he was black, because he wasn't born into the right family. And now they were laughing at him. The question I want you to answer in the comments is this. If you were Jayden in this moment, would you walk down to that stage or would you stay in your seat? Let me know what you'd do. Jayden stood up. The gymnasium went silent as Jayden Williams stood up from his seat in the back row. Every pair of eyes locked onto him. The 14-year-old scholarship student, wearing his too big thrift store blazer, began the long walk down the aisle toward the stage. His legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Each step echoed in the silence. Students whispered to each other. Some pulled out their phones, already recording. This was about to be either spectacular or a complete disaster, and either way they wanted it on camera. Vincent Ashford watched Jayden approach with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an experiment. Principal Harrington looked nervous, wringing his hands together. Mrs. Chin sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. Jayden climbed the steps to the stage, his hand gripping the railing tighter than necessary. Up close, the piano was even more beautiful. Even more intimidating. Vincent extended his hand. Jayden shook it, feeling the difference immediately. Vincent's hand was soft, manicured, the hand of a man who'd never done manual labor in his life. Jayden's hand was rougher, calloused from helping his mother carry groceries, from the part-time work he did on weekends to help make ends meet. So, Vincent said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Brandon tells me you think you can play piano?" Brandon, still standing in the front row, smirked. His friends were recording on their phones, barely containing their laughter. Jayden's throat was dry. I didn't say that, sir. But you do play?" Vincent pressed. "I teach myself, sir." Vincent's eyebrows rose. "Self-taught? How quaint." The way he said that word. Quaint. Like Jayden was a curious little oddity. A novelty. Something amusing to examine and then discard. Vincent reached out and grabbed Jayden's hands, turning them over, inspecting them like they were merchandise. "These are laborers' hands, not musicians' hands," he announced to the crowd. "Look at these calluses. These scars. Real pianists have delicate fingers, carefully maintained." Jayden wanted to pull his hands away, but he stood frozen. The humiliation burned through him like acid. A few uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even some of the students who'd been laughing earlier shifted in their seats. This was getting weird. This was getting cruel. But Vincent wasn't done. "Tell you what," he said, his eyes glittering with something dangerous. "Let's make this interesting." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. An actual checkbook, like something from another era. He pulled out a gold pen, clicked it open, and began to write. The scratch of pen on paper was the only sound in the entire gymnasium. When Vincent turned the check around, gasps exploded from the crowd. $2 million. He'd written a check for $2 million. "I'll bet this amount," Vincent said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "that you cannot play one complete classical piece perfectly on this piano." The gymnasium erupted. Students talking over each other. Faculty members looking shocked. News cameras zooming in on the check. This wasn't just a donation ceremony anymore. This was a spectacle. Principal Harrington jumped to his feet. "Mr. Ashford, perhaps we should discuss this in private." Vincent didn't even look at him. The boy can decline if he's not confident. And there it was. The trap. Because if Jayden declined now, he'd look like a coward. He'd look like he'd been lying about playing piano. He'd prove Brandon right, prove all of them right, that he didn't belong here. But if he accepted, Jayden's mind raced. $2 million. $2 million could change everything. His mother could quit 2 of her 3 jobs. Zara could get the best medical care, the specialist they couldn't afford. He could actually go to Juilliard, could pursue his dream instead of just fantasizing about it. $2 million could save his family. But the risk was everything. Public humiliation in front of the entire school, the news cameras, the world. Proving every racist stereotype right. The scholarship kid who thought he was special, who thought he could compete with his betters, falling flat on his face. Vincent smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. "What's wrong? Not up for the challenge?" From the crowd, Malik was pushing his way forward, trying to reach the stage. "Jayden, don't." But Jayden barely heard him. He was looking at Vincent Ashford, this man with his $4.7 billion, his designer suit, his collection of 47 pianos that he probably barely played. This man who saw Jayden as entertainment. As an amusing diversion. As something less than human. "What happens?" Jayden asked, his voice shaking but audible, "if I can't play it perfectly?" Vincent's smile widened. "Then you admit, in front of everyone here, that you don't belong at this school. And you leave Ashford Academy." The gymnasium exploded again. Students shouting. Faculty members protesting. Principal Harrington's face went white as paper. "Mr. Ashford," the principal stammered, "we can't possibly agree to those terms. This student's enrollment isn't something we can." Vincent turned to him slowly. "I donate $12 million annually to this school, Principal Harrington. $12 million. I think we can make an exception for a simple bet between a student and a benefactor, don't you?" The threat was clear. The power dynamic was clear. Principal Harrington's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Brandon and his friends had started a chant. "Do it, do it, do it." Other students picked it up, some mocking, some genuinely curious to see what would happen. Jayden stood there, the weight of the moment crushing down on him. He thought about his mother, working 3 jobs, her hands raw from cleaning and lifting in constant labor. He thought about Zara, his baby sister, who smiled through the pain of her illness, who believed in him unconditionally. He thought about his father, gone 4 years now, who used to tell him he was destined for greatness. He thought about that broken piano at the community center, where he'd spend hundreds of hours teaching himself, pouring his soul into music because it was the only thing that made him feel like he mattered. And he looked at Vincent Ashford, with his cruel smile and his checkbook and his absolute certainty that Jayden would fail. "I'll do it." The words came out stronger than Jayden expected. Clear. Vincent's eyes lit up with delight. This was going to be entertaining. Excellent. He clapped his hands together. "Randall, get the contracts." From the side of the gymnasium, a man in an expensive suit appeared. Of course Vincent had lawyers with him. Of course this had been planned. Or maybe Vincent was just the kind of person who traveled with legal representation at all times. The lawyer opened a briefcase and began typing on a laptop, projecting the document onto the screen behind the stage so everyone could see it. The terms appeared in black and white. Jayden Williams would have 48 hours to prepare. He would perform one complete classical concerto of Vincent Ashford's choosing. The performance would take place in front of the entire school, invited parents and media representatives. 3 professional judges selected by Vincent would evaluate the performance. One single mistake, would result in immediate disqualification. If Jayden played the piece perfectly, he would receive a certified check for $2 million. If Jayden failed, he would withdraw from Ashford Academy immediately and make a public statement about overestimating his abilities. Jayden's hands were shaking as he read the terms. This was real. This was actually happening. The lawyer printed out the contract on a portable printer, handed Jayden a pen. "Sign here, here, and here," the man said, his voice completely neutral, like this was just another day at the office. Jayden's hand trembled as he signed. His signature looked shaky, childish next to Vincent's bold scrawl. "Wonderful," Vincent said. He was enjoying this immensely. "Now for the piece you'll be playing." Mrs. Chen in the audience leaned forward in her seat. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor," Vincent announced. Mrs. Chen's face went pale. Around the gymnasium, the music students who actually knew what that meant looked shocked. The other students just looked confused. Vincent continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "Now I'll be generous. The full concerto is about 40 minutes long and requires a full orchestra. You only need to play the first movement. About 17 minutes. And you can play the solo piano arrangement." He said it like he was being kind. Like he was doing Jayden a favor. What he didn't say, what he didn't need to say because the music students already knew, was that Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 was one of the most difficult pieces of music ever written. Professional concert pianists spent years preparing to attempt it. It required exceptional technical skill, physical endurance, and massive hands to reach some of the chord progressions. They called it Rach 3. And it was notorious for breaking even experienced pianists. Vladimir Horowitz, one of the greatest pianists of the 20th century, had said the piece was designed to show off Rachmaninoff's extraordinary abilities and that most pianists couldn't do it justice. And Vincent Ashford expected a self-taught 14-year-old to learn it in 48 hours. The news cameras were capturing everything. Students had their phones out, recording, posting to social media in real time. Within minutes, the video was spreading. Within an hour, it would be viral. Hashtags were already forming. Hashtag $1,000,000 piano, hashtag Jayden's piano, hashtag Rach3 challenge. Jayden stood on that stage, the contract signed, the piece announced, and realized with growing horror what he'd agreed to. He'd been trapped. Perfectly, completely trapped. But it was too late to back out now. That evening, Jayden sat alone in the basement of the East Side Community Center, staring at the broken upright piano that had been his teacher, his companion, his escape for the past 3 years. Half the keys stuck. The whole thing was completely out of tune. Several of the hammers inside were broken, making certain notes sound dead or buzzing. There was water damage on the top from a leak that had happened years ago and never been properly repaired. And this was what he had to prepare for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. He tried to print the sheet music at the library, but the printer was broken. Out of paper. Out of ink. The librarian said it would be fixed tomorrow, maybe the day after. So Jayden did what he'd always done. He found a PDF online, pulled up a chair to the community center's ancient desktop computer, and hand-copied the music onto staff paper. Page after page after page. His hand cramped. His eyes burned from staring at the screen. The first movement alone was 53 pages of dense, complex notation. He worked until midnight, copying notes, trying to understand what he was seeing. The technical demands were staggering. Rapid passages that required fingers to move faster than seemed humanly possible. Massive chord progressions that his hands could barely span. Sections that required power and delicacy in the same breath. Reverend Thompson found him there around 11:30, hunched over the desk, still copying. "Son," the elderly man said gently, "you need to go home. Get some rest." Jayden didn't look up. "I can't. I have to learn this." Reverend Thompson looked at the pages spread across the desk at the title, Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 3. He didn't know much about classical music, but he knew enough to understand this was serious. "I saw the news," he said. "Everyone saw the news. Jayden, what that man did to you, that wasn't right." "I can do it," Jayden said, but his voice cracked. "I have to." "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "Yes, I do." Jayden finally looked up and his eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "I have to prove I belong there. I have to prove I'm good enough. I have to win that money for my family." Reverend Thompson sighed. He'd known this boy since he was 10 years old, had watched him grow up in this neighborhood, had seen the weight he carried. "What can I do to help?" "I don't know if anyone can help with this." But Reverend Thompson stayed anyway, sitting in the corner, a quiet presence while Jayden finally sat down at the broken piano and tried to play what he'd copied. It was a disaster. The piece was beyond anything he'd ever attempted. His fingers couldn't move fast enough. His hands couldn't stretch far enough. The broken keys made certain passages impossible to practice properly. After an hour of trying and failing, Jayden put his head down on the keys, and for the first time, let himself cry. When Jayden finally got home at 1 in the morning, he expected everyone to be asleep. Instead, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, still in her nursing scrubs, waiting for him. She'd seen the news. Of course she'd seen it. Everyone had seen it. The video had millions of views already. Jayden being called out, Vincent Ashford writing that check, the whole humiliating spectacle. "Baby," Angela said, and her voice was filled with so much pain it broke Jayden's heart. "Why would you agree to this?" Jayden dropped his backpack and sank into the chair across from her. "Mom, it's $2 million. It's a trap. It's a chance. It's a rich white man making a spectacle out of my son." Angela's voice rose, all the anger and fear and exhaustion of years pouring out. "Do you know what I watched today? I watched a billionaire humiliate you on live television. I watched him hold up your hands like you were livestock at auction. I watched him bet against you like you were nothing." "Mama?" "No." She stood up, her hands trembling. "You listen to me, Jayden Williams. I work 3 jobs. I break my back every single day. I do it because I love you and your sister, because I want you to have opportunities one never had. But not like this. Not by humiliating yourself for rich people's entertainment." Jayden felt something break inside him. He'd been holding it together all day, through the assembly, the contract signing, the stares and whispers, the hours at the community center. But now, sitting in their tiny kitchen with his mother looking at him with such anguish, he couldn't hold it anymore. "I can do it, Mama," he said, and his voice was shaking. "I know I can. $2 million. Do you know what that means? You could quit your jobs. Zara could see the specialist. We could actually have a life instead of just surviving." "And what if you can't?" Angela asked quietly. "What if you get up there and you fail? What then? You lose your scholarship. You have to leave that school. And worse, you have to stand in front of everyone and say you're not good enough." "Then at least I tried." Angela moved around the table and pulled her son into her arms. He was 14, almost as tall as her now, but in that moment he was still her baby. "You don't understand. You're so young. You don't understand what men like Vincent Ashford do. They don't make bets they can lose. This whole thing is designed for you to fail. To put you in your place. To remind people like us where we belong." "Maybe," Jayden whispered into her shoulder. "But what if I prove him wrong?" Before Angela could answer, a small voice came from the hallway. "Jayden?" They both turned. Zara stood in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She looked so small, so fragile. The chronic illness had kept her thin, made her seem younger than her 9 years. "Baby girl," Angela said, "you should be in bed." But Zara walked into the kitchen, went straight to Jayden, and looked up at him with absolute faith shining in her eyes. "You're the best piano player in the world, Jayden," she said simply. "I know you'll win." And just like that, Jayden's heart broke and mended at the same time. His little sister's faith in him was so complete, so unconditional. She didn't understand the odds. She didn't know about Rachmaninoff or the impossibility of what he was attempting. She just believed in her big brother. That belief was terrifying. Because what if he let her down? but it was also the most powerful thing in the world. After his mother and sister finally went to bed, Jayden spread the hand-copied sheet music across the kitchen table and studied it by the dim light of the overhead bulb. He studied until 3 in the morning, trying to memorize the patterns, understand the structure, find a way to make this work. The technical demands were staggering. There were sections that required his fingers to move in ways he'd never trained them to move. Rapid runs up and down the keyboard, spanning 4 octaves in seconds. Massive chord progressions that required hands bigger than his to play comfortably. Sections that needed both power and delicacy, aggression and tenderness. His hands already hurt just from imagining playing it. The reach on some of the chords. Rachmaninoff had famously large hands, could span a 13th on the piano. Jayden could barely span a 10th. How was he supposed to play passages designed for someone with completely different physical capabilities? Panic began to set in, cold and creeping. This was impossible. Literally, physically impossible for him to play perfectly. Vincent Ashford had chosen this piece specifically because it couldn't be done. Not by Jayden. Not in 48 hours. Not without proper training and a good piano and years of preparation. He'd been set up to fail from the beginning. The next morning, Jayden dragged himself to school on 3 hours of sleep. His eyes were gritty, his body exhausted, his mind foggy. But he couldn't skip. The contract had specified that he maintain his regular schedule, probably another way to make this harder. The moment he walked through the doors of Ashford Academy, he knew everything had changed. Students stared at him. Some pointed. Some whispered. Some openly laughed. He'd become an instant celebrity. A viral sensation. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone had an opinion. Some students looked at him with something like respect. The underdog taking on the billionaire. The scholarship kid refusing to back down. There were comments online calling him brave, calling out Vincent Ashford for being cruel. But just as many students thought he was an idiot. Thought he was arrogant. Thought he deserved whatever humiliation was coming. Between first and second period, Brandon and his crew found him in the hallway. Jayden was carrying his sheet music, the hand-copied pages carefully organized in a folder. He was trying to review the fingering patterns as he walked, trying to use every spare second to prepare. Brandon deliberately bumped into him. The folder went flying. 53 pages of hand-copied music scattered across the hallway floor. Students stopped to watch. Some pulled out their phones. "Oops," Brandon said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Did we mess up your little concert?" His friends laughed. One of them, a kid named Tyler, deliberately stepped on several pages, his shoe leaving dirty prints on the carefully written notes. Another student, Madison, accidentally kicked some pages further down the hall. Jayden dropped to his knees, frantically gathering the papers. Some were torn. Some were dirty. The hours of work he'd put into copying them, damaged in seconds. Malik appeared, shoving through the crowd. "Back off, Brandon." Brandon turned to him, amused. "Or what? You going to fight me? Get yourself expelled to defend this loser?" Before Malik could respond, Brandon shoved him. "Art." Malik stumbled backward into the lockers with a crash that echoed down the hallway. And Principal Harrington was there. Right there, standing 20 feet away, watching the whole thing. Jayden looked at him, waiting for the principal to intervene, to discipline Brandon, to do something. Principal Harrington met Jayden's eyes for a brief moment, then turned and walked in the other direction. The message was clear. You're on your own. At lunch, Jayden found a quiet corner of the cafeteria and spread out his damaged sheet music. He couldn't practice on a piano, but he could practice the finger movements. He placed his hands on the table and ran through the patterns, trying to build muscle memory. A group of students gathered to watch, filming him on their phones. "Look at him," someone said, laughing. "Thinks he's Mozart or something. He's going to crash and burn so hard. I heard he's never even had a lesson. Just watch his YouTube videos. 2 days to learn Rach 3? That's literally impossible." Maybe that's the point. Maybe Ashford wanted to make an example of him. Jayden tried to block them out, focus on the music. But their voices crept in, feeding the doubt that was already growing in his mind. Then someone new approached his table. Emma Rodriguez was first-chair violin in the school orchestra, a senior with actual talent and formal training since she was 4 years old. Her parents were wealthy, connected, the kind of people who went to galas with Vincent Ashford. Jayden had never spoken to her before. Students like Emma didn't talk to students like him. She sat down across from him without asking permission. "What they're doing isn't right," she said quietly. Jayden looked up, surprised. Emma gestured to the sheet music spread across the table. "That piece, it's nearly impossible. Even for professionals. What Ashford did to you was cruel. Jayden didn't know what to say. This was the first time a classmate who wasn't Malik had shown him kindness. I can help you, Emma continued. I know music theory. I can help you understand the structure, the patterns. It won't make it easy, but it might make it possible. Why would you help me? The question came out more suspicious than Jayden intended, but he couldn't help it. In his experience, people at this school didn't do things without a reason. Emma looked uncomfortable. Because my parents were at that assembly. They thought the whole thing was disgusting. They raised me to believe in fairness and justice, and there was nothing fair or just about what happened to you. She pulled out her own notebook. The first movement has 3 main themes. If you understand how they relate to each other, how they develop, you can start to see the logic of the piece instead of just trying to memorize thousands of individual notes. For the next 30 minutes, Emma broke down the structure of Rachmaninoff's Concerto, showing Jayden the patterns he'd been struggling to see on his own. She hummed the melodies, drew diagrams, explained the music theory that he'd never formally learned. It didn't make the piece easy. Nothing could do that. But it made it less overwhelming. It gave him a framework to work with. When the lunch period ended, Emma gathered her things. I have orchestra practice after school, but I'm free tonight. If you want to work together. I'd like that, Jayden said. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Emma said with a small smile. Thank me if you actually pull this off. After school, Jayden practically ran to the East Side Community Center. He had hours of practice ahead of him and every second counted. But when he reached the basement where the piano was kept, he found the door locked. A sign had been taped to it, water damage repairs closed 2 weeks. Sorry for the inconvenience. No. Jayden pulled on the door handle as if force could change reality. He pounded on the door. He looked for another entrance, another way in. But it was locked. The piano was inaccessible. Reverend Thompson found him there, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. I'm so sorry, son, the elderly man said. Pipe burst this morning. Flooded the whole basement. We've got contractors coming in, but it's going to be at least 2 weeks before it's usable again. I have 36 hours, Jayden said numbly. I need to practice. I need that piano. I know. I tried to find you at school to tell you, but... Reverend Thompson sat down beside him. There's got to be another option. Maybe the school would let you use their practice rooms? Jayden laughed bitterly. Yeah, I'm sure Principal Harrington would love to help me out. They sat in silence for a moment. Jayden felt the weight of impossibility crushing down on him. No piano. No way to practice. No chance of learning this piece in time. He'd failed before he'd even really begun. Jayden? The voice was gentle, familiar. Jayden looked up to see Mrs. Chen standing at the top of the steps, as if she'd materialized out of thin air. I thought I might find you here, she said. He didn't ask how she'd known. He didn't have the energy. Mrs. Chen descended the steps and sat on the other side of him, this tiny 73-year-old woman who'd been teaching music for 40 years, who'd seen thousands of students come and go. I have a piano, she said simply. At my home. You can practice there. Jayden's head snapped up. Mrs. Chen, I can't. You can, she interrupted. And you will. I don't offer this lightly, Jayden. But I've been teaching music for 4 decades, and I know talent when I see it. What's happening to you isn't fair. What that man did was unconscionable. But you have a gift, and I'm not going to let it be wasted because some billionaire decided to make you his entertainment. Tears stung Jayden's eyes. Thank you, seemed inadequate for what she was offering, but it was all he had. If you're finding yourself invested in Jayden's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This journey is just beginning and you won't want to miss what happens next. Mrs. Chen drove him to her house in comfortable silence. It was a modest home in a middle-class neighborhood, the kind of place where the houses were well-maintained but not ostentatious. Nothing like the mansions where most Ashford Academy faculty lived. She led him through the house and down to the basement. And there, in the corner, was a baby grand piano. It wasn't new. It wasn't a Steinway. But it was beautiful, well-maintained, and most importantly, it was in tune. This was my mother's, Mrs. Chen said, running her hand along the polished wood. She escaped from China with nothing but her music. She showed Jayden a series of photographs on the wall. A young Chinese woman at a piano, her posture perfect, her expression intense. The same woman, older, performing in front of an audience. The same woman, elderly, teaching a young girl, Mrs. Chen herself, to play. My mother was a prodigy in Shanghai in the 1950s, Mrs. Chen explained. During the Cultural Revolution she was labeled a bourgeois intellectual. They forbade her from playing. They destroyed her piano. For 10 years she couldn't touch an instrument. But she practiced anyway. She practiced fingering on table edges. She played entire concertos in her mind, memorizing every note. Mrs. Chen's voice grew soft with memory. When she finally escaped to America, her hands had forgotten. She was 40 years old and had to relearn everything. But she did it. She played her first concert at 43. Not because she was superhuman, but because she loved music more than she feared failure. She handed Jayden a key. Come anytime. Early morning, late night. Whatever you need. This piano wants to be played. Jayden sat at the bench, his hands hovering over the keys. This was a real instrument. This was what music was supposed to sound like. He began to play the opening of Rachmaninoff's Third. The sound was gorgeous, rich, full. So different from the broken upright at the community center. But the piece was still impossibly difficult. He made it 4 minutes before breaking down completely. Too many mistakes. Too many sections where his fingers just couldn't do what the music required. He put his head in his hands, frustration overwhelming him. Mrs. Chen sat beside him on the bench. Rome wasn't built in a day. Show me what you can do. For the next 4 hours she worked with him on just the first page. Just the opening passage. She taught him proper technique, how to position his hands, how to use his whole arm instead of just his fingers, how to distribute the weight of each note. These were things that professional pianists learned in their first lessons, but Jayden had never had a first lesson. He'd been teaching himself from YouTube videos, copying what he saw without understanding the mechanics behind it. Now Mrs. Chen was filling in those gaps, giving him the foundation he'd never had. Your left hand is too tense, she'd say. Relax your wrist. Let gravity do some of the work. This passage isn't about speed, it's about clarity. Each note needs to speak. You're rushing. Feel the rhythm in your whole body, not just your hands. It was painstaking work. Frustrating work. But slowly, incrementally he began to improve. By midnight he could play the opening passage. Really play it with proper technique and expression and only minor errors. It was just the opening. Just 2 minutes of a 17-minute piece. But it was progress. Mrs. Chen made him tea, insisted he eat the sandwich she'd prepared. You have 36 hours left, she said. Get some sleep. Come back at 5 in the morning. We'll work until school and then again after. Jayden looked at this woman who owed him nothing, who was giving him everything. Why are you doing this? Mrs. Chen smiled. Because my mother taught me that music doesn't care about your bank account. It only cares about your soul. And you, Jayden Williams, have soul. As Jayden left her house that night, the key to her home heavy in his pocket, he felt something he hadn't felt since signing that contract. Oh, it was a fragile thing, easily broken. The piece was still impossibly difficult. He still had barely scratched the surface of what needed to be learned. The odds were still stacked overwhelmingly against him. But for the first time he thought maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. Here's my question for you. Have you ever had someone believe in you when no one else did? Someone who gave you a chance when the whole world counted you out? Let me know in the comments. 36 hours to go. By the time Jayden woke up the next morning after 4 hours of sleep, his face was everywhere. The video had exploded overnight. Absolutely exploded. The hashtag Jayden's piano was trending #1 on Twitter. #1. The clip of Vincent Ashford writing that $2 million check, of Jayden standing on that stage looking terrified and determined, had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms. 50 million people had watched a 14-year-old boy get backed into an impossible corner. The internet, as always, was divided. Some people saw it for exactly what it was. A billionaire exploiting a child for entertainment. Comment sections filled with outrage. This is disgusting. Vincent Ashford is a bully. How is this legal? A grown man humiliating a teenager on national television. The think pieces started rolling out. Articles about class warfare, about systemic racism, about the cruelty of the ultra-wealthy. But just as many people had the opposite take. The kid agreed to it. Nobody forced him to sign that contract. If he can't handle the pressure, he shouldn't have stepped up. This is about merit, not race. Ashford is giving him an opportunity most kids would kill for. The debate raged across social media, cable news, talk radio. Everyone had an opinion about Jayden Williams, this scholarship student from the projects who thought he could play Rachmaninoff. By Wednesday morning, national news had picked up the story. CNN ran a segment. Fox News ran a segment. NPR did a deep dive into the ethics of the situation. The story had everything the media loved. Wealth, race, a David versus Goliath narrative, and a ticking clock. Vincent Ashford's PR team was in full crisis mode, trying to control the narrative. But Vincent himself seemed to be enjoying the chaos. He gave an interview to a major network, sitting in his mansion looking calm and collected. "I'm giving this young man the opportunity of a lifetime," Vincent said, his voice smooth and reasonable. $2 million. Do you know how many people would love that chance? If he's truly talented, if he's been honest about his abilities, then he'll rise to the occasion. That's what America is about. Merit. Hard work. Proving yourself. The interviewer pressed him. "But sir, critics are saying that Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto is impossibly difficult, especially for someone with no formal training and only 48 hours to prepare." Vincent smiled that empty smile. Then perhaps the young man shouldn't have accepted the challenge. "I gave him every opportunity to decline. It was masterful, really." He'd positioned himself as the generous benefactor, and Jayden as the one who'd overreached. If Jayden failed, it would be Jayden's fault for being arrogant. If by some miracle Jayden succeeded, Vincent could claim credit for giving him the platform. Either way, Vincent won. His company's stock actually went up. The controversy was profitable. The publicity was priceless. Vincent Ashford was back in the news, and this time as a philanthropist giving a poor kid a shot at the American dream. At the Williams apartment in the East Side projects, Angela's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets wanting interviews. Talk shows wanting her to appear. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. She refused them all. Every single one. She was protecting her son the only way she knew how, by keeping the media circus away from their door. But she couldn't protect him from everything. The online harassment was brutal. Racist comments flooded social media. Death threats appeared in Jayden's Instagram DMs. People he'd never met felt entitled to tell him he was uppity, arrogant, that he should know his place. The N-word appeared more times than anyone should have to see. People telling him he was going to embarrass his race. People saying they hoped he failed spectacularly. But there were supporters too. Messages of encouragement from strangers. Musicians from around the world sending advice. Some people started a crowdfunding campaign to help the Williams family, though Jayden didn't even know about it yet. A famous concert pianist, someone Jayden had watched on YouTube dozens of times, tweeted, "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in 48 hours? This is an opportunity. This is cruelty. This is a setup. And shame on anyone who pretends otherwise." The tweet went viral too. The musician's followers attacked Vincent Ashford's social media accounts. But Vincent's supporters attacked back. The whole thing became a cultural battleground with Jayden Williams at the center, whether he wanted to be or not. Jayden tried to ignore all of it. He deleted social media from his phone. He stopped checking the news. He had one job: learn this impossible piece of music in the time he had left. At 5 in the morning on the second day, 36 hours before the performance, Jayden let himself into Mrs. Chen's house with the key she'd given him. His hands were already cramping. His fingers had started bleeding the night before from the hours of practice, the skin wearing away from the constant friction against the keys. He'd wrapped them in bandages, but the bandages made playing harder, so he'd taken them off. Now the keys had tiny smears of blood on them. He sat at Mrs. Chen's mother's piano and began again. Opening passage. First theme. Transition. Second theme. Development section. He could play the first 6 minutes now. Not perfectly but competently. But the piece was 17 minutes long. And the further he got into it, the harder it became. The cadenza, the solo showcase section where the pianist was supposed to demonstrate their virtuosity, was destroying him. Absolutely destroying him. It was a section designed for masters, for pianists with decades of experience. The technical demands were beyond anything Jayden had ever attempted. His fingers couldn't move fast enough. His hands couldn't stretch far enough. The endurance required was beyond what his young, untrained body could sustain. By 8 in the morning he still couldn't get through the piece without major errors. Errors that would mean instant disqualification. Mrs. Chen arrived at 8:15 with breakfast. She took one look at his bloody fingers and insisted on cleaning and bandaging them properly. "You can't practice if you damage your hands permanently," she said, her voice gentle but firm. At 10 Jayden had to leave for school. The contract specified he had to maintain his regular schedule. Vincent Ashford had made sure of that. No special accommodations. No excused absences. Jayden had to be a full-time student and somehow prepare for the most difficult piano performance of his life. In third-period chemistry, Jayden fell asleep at his desk. He couldn't help it. The exhaustion was crushing. 3 hours of sleep in the last 2 days. His body just gave out. The teacher, Mr. Patterson, noticed immediately. Mr. Williams. His voice was sharp, designed to humiliate. Are we boring you? The class went silent. Everyone turned to look. Jayden jerked awake, disoriented. I'm sorry, sir, If you're too busy with your little concert, perhaps you don't need an education, Mr. Patterson said. The contempt in his voice was clear. Maybe you should just drop out now, save us all the trouble of watching you fail. A few students laughed. Most looked uncomfortable. This was cruel even by Ashford Academy standards. Jayden said nothing. What could he say? He kept his head down for the rest of class, fighting to stay awake, humiliation burning through him. At lunch, he couldn't face the cafeteria, couldn't face the stairs and the phones recording his every move. Instead, he went to Mrs. Chen's classroom. She was there, grading papers. When she saw him, she simply nodded toward the old upright piano in the corner. Go ahead, she said. Practice. Jayden sat at the upright and began working through the difficult sections. The piano wasn't as nice as the one at Mrs. Chen's house, but it was better than nothing. He'd been playing for maybe 15 minutes when he heard it. Banging on the windows. Brandon and his crew had gathered outside Mrs. Chen's classroom. They were pounding on the glass, making faces, laughing. Filming everything on their phones. Other students gathered to watch. Some joined in the harassment. Others just stood there, unwilling to participate but equally unwilling to stop it. Mrs. Chen stood up, ready to go outside and confront them. But before she could, Principal Harrington appeared in her doorway. Mrs. Chen, he said, his voice tight. Students are complaining about the noise. You need to stop this. Mrs. Chen looked at him incredulously. Excuse me? The piano playing. It's disturbing other students during their lunch period. The banging on my windows is disturbing my lunch period, Mrs. Chen said, her voice cold. Perhaps you should address that. Principal Harrington's face flushed. I'm telling you as your supervisor to have the students stop playing. The unspoken threat was clear. Defy him and there would be consequences. Mrs. Chen looked at Jayden, then back at the principal. For a long moment, Jayden thought she might refuse. Might tell Harrington exactly what she thought of him. But she was 73 years old, close to retirement, and the principal held all the power. Fine, she said quietly. Jayden stood up from the piano bench. It's okay, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for trying. He gathered his sheet music and left, Brandon's laughter following him down the hallway. After school, Jayden went straight back to Mrs. Chen's house. Every second counted now. Less than 24 hours until the performance. When he let himself in, he found a surprise waiting in the basement. Emma Rodriguez was there, her violin case open, her instrument in her hands. Mrs. Chen called me, Emma explained. She thought I could help. Mrs. Chen descended the stairs with tea and cookies, like this was all perfectly normal. Rachmaninoff's third was written for piano and orchestra, she said. The solo piano arrangement is missing something. Emma can provide some of the orchestral parts. Help you feel the rhythm, the interplay between instruments. It was brilliant. Jayden had been practicing in isolation, trying to create the full sound of the piece with just the piano. But the concerto was meant to be a conversation between piano and orchestra. Having Emma there, playing the violin parts, gave him something to respond to, something to play off of. They practiced for hours. Emma would play the orchestral themes on her violin, and Jayden would answer with the piano. They worked through sections together, Emma counting out rhythms, helping him feel the pulse of the music in a way he couldn't when playing alone. Here, Emma said, playing a soaring violin melody. This is what the orchestra would be doing during this passage. You're not alone in this section. You're in dialogue with them. It helped. God, it helped so much. The music started to make sense in a way it hadn't before. The structure became clearer. The emotional arc became more obvious. They worked until 11 at night. Mrs. Chen brought them dinner, which they ate quickly before returning to practice. During a break, Emma said something that Jayden would remember forever. My parents have money, she said, her voice quiet. Like, a lot of money. They know Vincent Ashford. They go to the same charity galas, belong to the same country club. And they said this whole thing is disgusting. They said Ashford should be ashamed of himself. She looked at Jayden directly. But you're actually good. Like really good. If you had the training I've had, the private lessons, the master classes, the opportunities, you'd be incredible. You'd be at conservatory already. The fact that you taught yourself, that you got this far on your own, that's extraordinary. Jayden felt something crack open in his chest. He'd spent so long feeling less than, feeling like he didn't belong, feeling like a charity case. To hear someone acknowledge his talent, not as something cute or surprising, but as something real and valuable. He allowed himself a moment of hope. "Let's try the full piece again," he said. They started from the beginning. Opening theme. First development. Transition. Second theme. 6 minutes. 8 minutes. 10 minutes. At the 12-minute mark, right in the middle of the cadenza, Jayden's hands seized up. Just stopped working. The pain was sudden and intense, radiating from his fingers up through his wrists. He'd pushed too hard, practiced too long, asked too much of his untrained hands. He crashed to a stop, gasping. And something inside him broke. "I can't do this," he said, his voice raw. "I was stupid to think I could." The tears came then, unstoppable. All the stress, all the pressure, all the impossibility of what he was attempting poured out. "I can't do it," he sobbed. "It's too hard. My hands aren't good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm going to get up there tomorrow and fail in front of everyone, and they're all going to know they were right about me. I don't belong at Ashford Academy. I don't belong anywhere near this music." Emma looked stricken, unsure what to do. Mrs. Chen sat beside Jayden on the piano bench, saying nothing, just being present while he fell apart. When the tears finally subsided, when Jayden could breathe again, Mrs. Chen spoke. "Can I tell you about my mother?" Jayden nodded, wiping his eyes. Mrs. Chen stood and retrieved a photo from her desk upstairs. She brought it down and handed it to Jayden. It showed an elderly Chinese woman sitting at a piano, her hands on the keys, her face lit up with a smile so radiant it seemed to glow from within. "My mother was a prodigy in Shanghai in the 1950s, Mrs. Chen began. By the time she was 16, she was performing professionally, being hailed as one of the great pianists of her generation. She had everything ahead of her. A career, recognition, a life in music." Mrs. Chen's voice grew heavy. Then came the Cultural Revolution. Artists and intellectuals were targeted. My mother was labeled a bourgeois intellectual, an enemy of the people. They forbade her from playing. They destroyed her piano in front of her, smashed it to pieces while she watched. Jayden looked at the photo, at this woman's joyful expression, trying to imagine the pain she must have endured. "For 10 years, Mrs. Chen continued, my mother didn't touch a piano. 10 years. But she didn't stop being a musician. She practiced fingering on table edges. She played entire concertos in her mind, every note memorized, every dynamic imagined. She kept the music alive inside her when the world tried to kill it." Mrs. Chen sat back down beside Jayden. When she finally escaped to America, she was 40 years old. Her hands had forgotten how to play. The muscle memory was gone. The technique had faded. She had to relearn everything from the beginning. Scales. Arpeggios. Simple pieces she'd mastered as a child. Some people told her it was too late. That she was too old. That she'd missed her chance. But she didn't listen. She practiced every day, rebuilding what had been taken from her. And at 43 years old, she played her first concert in America. Mrs. Chen pointed to the photo. This was taken at her 70th birthday concert, 50 years after the Cultural Revolution tried to silence her. She played until the day she died last year at 91. Tears were streaming down Mrs. Chen's face now. She didn't do it because she was superhuman. She didn't do it because it was easy or because she was guaranteed success. She did it because she loved music more than she feared failure. She looked directly at Jayden. "She passed away last year. I think she'd want you to use her piano. Not to prove something to Vincent Ashford. Not to win his money or his respect. But to prove something to yourself." Jayden stared at the photo, this woman who'd lost everything and rebuilt it through sheer determination and love. "What if I fail?" he whispered. "What if I get up there and humiliate myself and my family?" Mrs. Chen smiled gently. "What if you don't? What if you walk out on that stage tomorrow and play your music your way? Not perfectly. Not flawlessly. But honestly. With everything you have." She took his bandaged hands in hers. "Perfection isn't the goal, Jayden. Perfection is what Vincent Ashford wants because perfection is impossible and he knows it. He wants you to chase perfection so you'll fail. But passion, real, honest, heartfelt passion, that's something he can't touch. That's something you have that all his billions can't buy." Something shifted in Jayden. The despair didn't disappear completely, but it made room for something else. Determination. Defiance. A quiet certainty that whether he won or lost tomorrow, he was going to play his heart out. Not for Vincent Ashford. Not for the money. For himself. For his family. For Mrs. Chen's mother and everyone else who'd been told they weren't good enough. Emma, who'd been watching silently, spoke up. "I'm staying. All night if you need me. We're doing this together." And they did. At midnight they were still practicing. Emma had fallen asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch upstairs, her violin beside her, but Jayden kept going. Around 1 in the morning there was a knock at the door. Malik stood there holding bags of fast food. "Dude," he said, walking in like he owned the place. "You think I'm gonna let you do this alone? I brought burgers." Jayden laughed, the first real laugh in days. "How'd you even know I was here?" "Mrs. Chen called my mom. Said you could use some moral support." Malik set the food down and pulled up a chair. "Also, half the school thinks you're crazy and the other half thinks you're a hero. I just think you're my best friend and I got your back." They ate together, taking a break from the relentless practice. Malik told stupid jokes. He showed Jayden supportive messages from their neighborhood, from people at the community center, from teachers at his old middle school. People who believed in him. After Malik left around 2:30, Jayden sat back down at the piano. He played through the entire piece one more time. He still made mistakes. The cadenza still wasn't perfect. There were sections where his technique faltered, where his hands couldn't quite do what Rachmaninoff demanded. But something was different. He wasn't playing to be perfect anymore. He was playing because he loved it. Because the music spoke to something deep inside him that had nothing to do with winning or losing, with proving anything to anyone. The music flowed through him differently now. Less rigid. More honest. More him. At 3 in the morning, Jayden finally left Mrs. Chen's house. He had to go home, try to get some sleep before the performance, and he checked his phone. 15 hours. When he quietly let himself into the apartment, he expected everyone to be asleep. Instead, he found his mother sitting on the couch, awake, hands folded in prayer. She looked up when he entered. Her eyes were red from crying. "Mama," Jayden said softly, "you should be sleeping." "I've been praying," Angela said. "Praying for you. Praying for strength. Praying that whatever happens tomorrow, you'll be okay." Jayden sat beside her on the couch. That's when he noticed Zara, curled up on the other end, asleep with her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. "She didn't want to go to bed," Angela explained. "She wanted to wait up for you. Finally fell asleep about an hour ago." Jayden looked at his little sister, so small, so sick, so full of faith in him. Angela took her son's bandaged hands gently. "Baby, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. So proud. Not because you might win that money. Not because you might prove Vincent Ashford wrong. But because you didn't back down. Because you stood up for yourself. Because you showed courage." She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old photograph. Jayden's father, James Williams, at a construction site, wearing his hard hat and his work clothes, that huge smile on his face that Jayden remembered so well. "Your father always said you were special," Angela whispered. "Not because of what you could do. Because of who you are. Kind. Determined. Brave. He would be so proud of the man you're becoming." Jayden took the photo, traced his father's face with his finger. He'd been 10 when his father died. For years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm scared, Mama," Jayden admitted. "I'm so scared I'm going to fail." "I know, baby. I know." Angela pulled him into her arms, this boy who was almost taller than her now but would always be her child. "But you know what? You've already won. Because you tried. Because you didn't let fear stop you. Because you believed you were worth more than what people told you." They sat there together, mother and son, in the quiet apartment, while the city slept outside their window. Jayden finally went to bed around 3:30 in the morning. He set his alarm for 7, knowing he'd only get 3.5 hours of sleep. He dreamed of music. Not of performing, not of the concert hall or the judges or Vincent Ashford. Just music. Pure sound, flowing through him like water, like light, like something essential and true. When his alarm went off, Jayden Williams woke up to the day that would change his life forever. If you've made it this far in the story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because the performance is coming up next, and you absolutely cannot miss what happens when Jayden finally sits down at that Steinway grand piano. The question I want you to answer in the comments is this: when was the last time you did something that terrified you? Something where you weren't sure if you'd succeed but you tried anyway? Share your story below. The performance was scheduled for 6 o'clock that evening. Jayden had 12 hours left. 12 hours to rest, to practice a few final times, to prepare himself mentally for what was about to happen. 12 hours until he walked onto that stage in front of the entire school, the parents, the media, the 3 judges Vincent Ashford had selected, and the man himself. 12 hours until he either played the performance of his life or proved every doubter right. The clock was ticking. The morning of the performance, Jayden woke up with his heart already racing. This was it. The day that would define everything. He went through his morning routine in a daze. Shower. Get dressed. Try to eat breakfast, though his stomach was in knots. His mother had made pancakes, his favorite, but they tasted like cardboard. Zara sat across from him at the table, watching him with those wide, trusting eyes. "You're going to be amazing," she said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Jayden wished he had even a fraction of her certainty. By 3 in the afternoon, the transformation of Ashford Academy's gymnasium was complete. And it was stunning. The basketball hoops had been retracted. The bleachers had been replaced with row after row of elegant chairs. A professional stage had been constructed at one end, complete with concert-quality lighting and a sound system that would capture every single note, every tiny mistake in perfect clarity. And in the center of that stage, gleaming under the lights like a black jewel, sat the Steinway Model D grand piano. It was positioned perfectly, angled so the audience could see Jayden's hands, his face, every moment of his performance. Or his failure. News crews were setting up their cameras. There were at least a dozen different media outlets represented. This wasn't just a school event anymore. This was a national story, and everyone wanted footage of the climax. The crowd began gathering at 5 o'clock, a full hour before the performance. Students arrived first, some genuinely curious, others just wanting to witness what they assumed would be a spectacular crash and burn. Then came the parents, the faculty members of the local community who'd heard about this impossible bet. The gymnasium filled quickly. Every seat taken. People standing along the walls. The air buzzed with anticipation and whispered conversations. At 5:30, a black limousine pulled up to the school's entrance. Vincent Ashford emerged like a celebrity arriving at a premiere. His suit probably cost more than the Williams family's annual rent. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His smile was wide and confident. Reporters swarmed him immediately. "Mr. Ashford, are you confident about the outcome tonight?" Vincent's smile didn't waver. "I'm excited to see if this young man has what it takes. I've given him an incredible opportunity. If he's as talented as he claims, this is his moment to prove it." Some critics have called this exploitation. How do you respond? "Critics will always criticize," Vincent said smoothly. "I see a young man who wanted a chance to show what he could do, and I'm giving him that chance. $2 million. That's more than most people make in a lifetime. If he can deliver, it's his." The reporters ate it up. Vincent knew exactly what he was doing, exactly how to position himself as the generous benefactor rather than the cruel billionaire setting up a child to fail. Inside the gymnasium, the 3 judges took their seats in the front row. All 3 were professional pianists that Vincent had personally selected. All 3 were white. All 3 were from elite conservatories, Juilliard, Curtis, New England Conservatory. And all 3 looked skeptical, their faces already showing doubt that this self-taught kid from the projects could play one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire. They had their scorecards ready, their pens poised to mark every error. Mrs. Chin arrived and found her seat in the front row, close to the stage. She wore a simple black dress, elegant and understated. Her face was calm, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Malik showed up wearing his best clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt he'd borrowed from his older brother. Emma Rodriguez was there in a dark blue dress, her violin case at her feet even though she wouldn't be playing tonight. Together, they'd made a sign, handmade with markers and poster board, "We believe in Jayden." They held it up, not caring what anyone else thought. And then Angela Williams entered with Zara, and the class divide in that gymnasium became impossible to ignore. Angela wore her Sunday best, a dress she'd had for 10 years, carefully maintained and pressed. Zara wore a yellow dress that Angela had saved for months to buy, wanting her daughter to have something pretty and new. They walked in with their heads held high, and you could see the stares, could feel the judgment from some corners of the room. But they weren't alone. Other families from their neighborhood had come. People from the East Side projects who'd pooled money to rent a bus to get here. Single mothers who'd asked for time off work. Elderly neighbors who'd known Jayden since he was a baby. The black church choir from Reverend Thompson's church, all 20 members, dressed in their choir robes. Reverend Thompson led them to their section, and they filled an entire block of seats. They weren't here for the spectacle. They were here for one of their own. The visual contrast in the audience was stark. On one side, Vincent Ashford's circle. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, champagne being served in what was supposed to be a dry school event, but nobody was going to tell Vincent Ashford no. They looked like they were at the opera, bored and superior. On the other side, Jayden's supporters in their best but modest clothes. The divide wasn't just about money. It was about everything. Two Americas sitting in the same room. Brandon and his cruel friends sat with Vincent's group, already laughing, phones out, ready to capture and mock whatever was about to happen. At 5:45, Jayden entered through a side door with Mrs. Chen. He was wearing a suit that Reverend Thompson had lent him. It was slightly too big, the sleeves a little long, the pants needing to be rolled up at the bottom. But it was clean and pressed and the best he had. When Jayden stepped into the holding room and caught a glimpse of the gymnasium through the doorway, his breath caught in his throat. There had to be 800 people out there. Maybe more. The cameras. The lights. The judges. Vincent Ashford sitting in the front row like a king on a throne. The magnitude of what he was about to attempt crashed over him like a wave. Mrs. Chen gently guided him to a chair in the holding room. Sit. Breathe. Center yourself. But Jayden couldn't sit still. He paced. His hands were shaking. Sweat was already forming on his forehead, and he hadn't even touched the piano yet. He could hear the crowd through the walls. The murmur of hundreds of conversations. Laughter. The scrape of chairs. The hum of anticipation. 30 minutes. They made him wait 30 minutes in that holding room before he could perform. It was Vincent's final power play. Let the kid sit and stew and panic. Let the anxiety build. Make it worse. Mrs. Chen sat with him, a quiet, steady presence. She didn't offer platitudes or empty encouragement. She just sat there, being present, reminding him he wasn't alone. At 6:05, Principal Harrington entered the holding room. He looked nervous, uncomfortable, like a man caught between competing pressures. Jayden, he said, his voice attempting kindness but landing somewhere near condescension. You can still back out. No one would blame you. Jayden looked up at him. Mr. Ashford has agreed to let you withdraw without penalty, Principal Harrington continued. You keep your scholarship. You stay at Ashford Academy. You just don't have to do this. And in that moment Jayden understood. They wanted him to quit. This whole thing had been designed to make him give up. To make him realize he was in over his head, to make him choose humiliation now over greater humiliation later. To prove he didn't belong, that he should know his place, that he should be grateful for what he had and stop reaching for more. That's what Vincent wanted. Not the performance. The surrender. Jayden stood up. His voice was steady when he spoke. No, sir. I'm playing. Principal Harrington's face flickered with something. Disappointment? Concern? But he nodded and left. Mrs. Chen stood and placed her hands on Jayden's shoulders. Remember, she said quietly, this is your music, not his show. Not their entertainment. Yours. At 6:15, Jayden heard his name being announced over the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Jayden Williams. This was it. Mrs. Chen squeezed his hand once, then let go. Jayden walked through the doorway into the lights onto the stage. The applause was mixed. Enthusiastic from some quarters. Polite from others. Silent from still others who just wanted to see him fail. The walk to the piano felt like a mile. Every eye in the gymnasium was on him. The cameras were recording. The judges were watching. Vincent Ashford was sitting in the front row, legs crossed casually, that infuriating smirk on his face, checking his watch like this was mildly inconvenient. Jayden sat at the piano bench. The Steinway was even more beautiful up close. The keys were perfect, pristine, not a single one sticking or out of tune. This was what a real piano felt like. What real pianists played. He adjusted the bench. Took a deep breath. Tried to steady his shaking hands. He looked out into the audience and found his mother's face. Angela was sitting rigid in her seat, her hands clasped in prayer, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Beside her, Zara was bouncing with excitement, her yellow dress bright against the dark crowd. Jayden's eyes moved across the front row. Vincent Ashford still smirking. The three judges with their scorecards, pens ready to mark every error. Brandon filming on his phone, barely containing his anticipation of the disaster he was certain was coming. But then Jayden saw Mrs. Chen. She was sitting perfectly still, her face serene. And as their eyes met, she placed her hand over her heart. A simple gesture. But it meant everything. This isn't about them. This is about you. Your music. Your truth. Jayden closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought of his father, that photo of him at the construction site with that huge smile. He thought of Zara's absolute faith. He thought of Mrs. Chen's mother, practicing on table edges for 10 years, never giving up on her music. He thought of everyone who'd been told they weren't good enough, that they didn't belong, that they should know their place. And then he opened his eyes, placed his hands on the keys and began. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor. First movement. The opening notes were strong, confident, clear. The crowd went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that gymnasium. Jayden played the first page exactly as he'd practiced. His fingers found the patterns, the muscle memory kicking in. 2 minutes in, still flawless. In the front row, Vincent Ashford's smirk began to fade. The judges sat up straighter, looking surprised. This kid was actually playing it? Really playing it? 4 minutes. This was farther than Jayden had gotten in most of his practice runs without making a major error. His hands found the patterns like they'd always known them. The muscle memory was there, built through those endless hours at Mrs. Chen's mother's piano. 5 minutes. 6 minutes. The music began to build, the themes developing, the complexity increasing. And Jayden wasn't just playing notes anymore. He was feeling it. Every emotion he'd carried for the past 48 hours, the fear, the anger, the determination, the hope, it was all pouring into the music. 7 minutes in, approaching a difficult transition, Jayden's left hand stumbled slightly on a chord progression. Just a tiny hesitation, a small imperfection in the timing. The judges immediately marked their scorecards. Vincent leaned forward, eyes sharp. There it was. The first mistake. But Jayden didn't stop. He recovered instantly and kept going. 8 minutes. 9 minutes. Sweat was forming on his forehead now. His hands were starting to ache from the relentless technical demands. But he pushed through. 10 minutes. Halfway through. He was approaching the technical section that had killed him in practice, the rapid runs up and down the keyboard that required fingers to move faster than seemed possible. Jayden closed his eyes and let his fingers fly. The notes cascaded out of the piano like water, like light. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe the timing was slightly off in places. But it was powerful. It was real. 11 minutes. 12 minutes. The crowd was completely mesmerized. Even the people who'd come to watch him fail, even the students who'd mocked him, even Vincent Ashford's circle with their champagne and their superiority, they were all listening now. Because this wasn't professional polish. This wasn't the technical perfection of someone who'd trained at a conservatory for years. This was raw. Honest. Human. This was a 14-year-old boy from the projects playing his heart out, pouring his entire soul into music, and it was impossible not to feel it. 13 minutes in, Jayden was approaching the cadenza. The solo showcase. The section where virtuosos prove their mastery. The most difficult part of the entire piece, the part that had broken him in practice over and over again. His hands were screaming in pain now. Every nerve ending in his fingers felt like it was on fire. The physical demands of what he'd been doing for 13 straight minutes were catching up to him. For a moment, just a moment, Jayden thought about stopping. About giving up. About admitting defeat before the cadenza destroyed him. But then he heard Zara's voice in his head, clear as a bell. You're the best piano player in the world, Jayden. And he dove into the cadenza. His fingers blurred across the keys. The notes came so fast they almost seemed to blend together into one continuous sound. Some notes were imperfect. Some of the timing was off. He couldn't reach some of the chord progressions the way Rachmaninoff had intended, had to adjust, had to make it work with his smaller hands. But the soul was there. The passion. The heart. The story. Because Jayden wasn't playing Rachmaninoff's music anymore. He was playing his life. Every struggle. Every moment of being invisible at school. Every time he'd been told he didn't belong. Every morning waking up at 4:45 to help his sister. Every night watching his mother come home exhausted from her third job. Every hour at that broken piano at the community center, teaching himself, dreaming of something bigger. The keys became his voice. And for 17 minutes, Jayden Williams was not a scholarship student or a charity case or a kid from the projects. He was a musician. 14 minutes. 15 minutes. The music was building toward the final crescendo, the massive chords that required both hands spanning the entire keyboard, reaching, stretching. Jayden's small hands reached as far as they could. Some of the notes he couldn't hit perfectly, but he hit them with everything he had. 16 minutes. The final passage. Complex. Demanding. Beautiful. He poured everything into it. Every last bit of strength. Every ounce of determination. Every dream he'd ever had. 17 minutes. The last chord. Jayden's hands came down on the keys with power and certainty. He held the chord, letting it ring out through the gymnasium, the sound waves filling every corner of the space. And then he released. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Jayden sat at the piano, his hands still on the keys, trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline and emotion. He looked up at the crowd, hardly daring to breathe. Vincent Ashford was frozen in his seat, his expression unreadable. The three judges were conferring quietly, looking down at their scorecards, their faces serious. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds. And then Reverend Thompson stood up. The elderly preacher began to clap, his hands coming together in steady, deliberate applause. The church choir joined him, all 20 members rising to their feet, applauding, some of them with tears streaming down their faces. Angela Williams was on her feet, no longer trying to hold back her tears, clapping so hard her hands had to hurt. Zara was jumping up and down in her yellow dress, cheering, "That's my brother! That's my brother!" Mrs. Chin stood, her face radiant, applauding with quiet dignity. Malik and Emma were on their feet, holding up their sign, cheering at the top of their lungs. More people started standing. The wave of applause spread through the audience like wildfire. Students who'd supported Jayden. Faculty members who'd been moved by the performance. Members of the community who'd come to witness something special. Even some of Vincent's circle, uncomfortable now, began to clap. Because how could they not? How could anyone sit through that performance and not acknowledge what they'd just witnessed? But it wasn't universal. Some people remained seated, stone-faced, unmoved or unwilling to admit they'd been moved. Principal Harrington was looking to Vincent Ashford for cues, waiting to see how he should react. Brandon had lowered his phone, his expression confused. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The scholarship kid was supposed to fail. That was the script. The applause grew louder, more sustained. Some people in the back rows were cheering now, whistling, making noise. Jayden stood on shaking legs. He bowed, a small, humble bow, and his legs nearly gave out beneath him. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the exhaustion was crushing. He walked off stage, barely holding it together, his vision blurring with tears he'd been holding back for 17 minutes. The moment he was off stage, out of view of the cameras and the crowd, his legs did give out. Mrs. Chin caught him, this tiny 73-year-old woman supporting this teenage boy who'd just given everything he had. "You did it," she whispered. "Oh, Jayden. You did it. Did I win?" Jayden asked, his voice breaking. "Was it perfect enough?" "I don't know," Mrs. Chin said honestly. "I don't know what those judges will say. But perfect? No. It wasn't perfect." Jayden's heart sank. "It was better than perfect," Mrs. Chin continued, pulling back to look at him. "It was true. Before you find out what happens next, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. We're about to get to the resolution, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming." In the gymnasium, the applause was finally dying down. People were settling back into their seats. The judges were still conferring, looking at their scorecards, having what appeared to be a heated discussion. Vincent Ashford sat in the front row, his face carefully neutral now, but his jaw was tight. This had not gone according to plan. The crowd waited, the tension building again. Because everyone knew what came next. The verdict. Had Jayden played perfectly? Had he made too many mistakes? Would the judges rule in his favor or Vincent's? $2 million hung in the balance. Jayden's future at Ashford Academy hung in the balance. His pride, his family's hopes, everything. The head judge, a severe-looking woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, stood up. She walked to the microphone at the side of the stage. The gymnasium fell silent again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice formal and measured. "We have reviewed Mr. Williams' performance according to the terms of the agreement." Angela Williams gripped Zara's hand so tightly the little girl winced. Malik and Emma held their breath. Mrs. Chin closed her eyes. And in the holding room, Jayden stood with his back against the wall, unable to watch, barely able to breathe. "According to classical piano performance standards," the judge continued, "we have identified several technical errors in the performance." A murmur went through the crowd. Vincent Ashford's smirk returned. "There were instances of imperfect timing," the judge said. "Missed grace notes. Chord progressions that were not executed with complete technical precision." Brandon and his friends were grinning now, elbowing each other. "However," the judge said, and that one word made everyone go silent again. "Here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. Have you ever worked incredibly hard for something, given it everything you had, and then had to wait to find out if it was enough? Tell me about that moment. What was it like?" The judge's next words would determine everything. In the holding room, Jayden collapsed into a chair, his entire body shaking. The adrenaline that had carried him through 17 minutes of the most difficult music he'd ever played was draining away, leaving him hollow and trembling. Mrs. Chin brought him water. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the cup. "You were magnificent," she said softly. Jayden looked up at her with desperate eyes. "But did I win?" Was it perfect? Mrs. Chen's face was honest, kind, but uncertain. I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know. Outside in the gymnasium, the three judges had gathered in a tight circle, their voices low but intense. They were having a heated discussion, their scorecards spread out before them. The scorecards told a clear story. Multiple small errors. Missed notes. Timing slightly off in several passages. Technical imperfections that, by strict classical performance standards, meant the performance was not perfect. But there was something else on those scorecards. Something harder to quantify. Notes about artistry. About emotion. About interpretation. The technical imperfections were undeniable. But so was everything else. Vincent Ashford approached the judges, his movements casual but his eyes sharp. He glanced down at the scorecards and his smile was cold and satisfied. Looks clear to me, he said. Multiple errors. He lost. The head judge, Dr. Patricia Morrison, a renowned pianist who'd spent 35 years performing and teaching at the highest levels, looked up at him. Her expression was carefully neutral. Mr. Ashford, with respect. The terms were specific, Vincent interrupted. Play perfectly. He made mistakes. Multiple mistakes. It's really quite simple. He also played one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire with 48 hours of practice and no formal training, Dr. Morrison said, her voice measured but firm. That's not just impressive. It's extraordinary. Vincent's smile didn't waver. The bet was specific. Perfect or nothing. We all signed a contract. The second judge, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who taught at Curtis Institute, nodded in agreement with Vincent. The terms were clear. By classical performance standards, there were definitive errors. I have to rule that the performance did not meet the contractual requirement of perfection. But the third judge, a younger woman from New England Conservatory, shook her head. I disagree. The spirit of music isn't about robotic perfection. It's about expression, emotion, connection. What that boy did up there was remarkable. I'm ruling in his favor. Dr. Morrison looked at her colleagues, then at Vincent Ashford, then back at the scorecards. I concur with my colleague. He wins. 2-1. A split decision. Vincent's face tightened with barely controlled anger. You can't just change the criteria because you felt emotionally moved. We had specific, measurable standards. We had standards, Dr. Morrison agreed. And he met the most important one, he played the piece. Brilliantly. The deadlock was clear. The media outside was clamoring for a verdict. Principal Harrington was hovering nearby, his face pale with anxiety, begging for a decision, terrified of the chaos this was causing. Vincent Ashford made a decision. He would take control of this situation himself. He straightened his jacket, fixed his smile, and walked onto the stage to the microphone. The crowd fell instantly silent. Everyone had been waiting for this moment. The verdict. Vincent gestured for Jayden to be brought back onto the stage. Mrs. Chin held Jayden's arm as he walked out, his legs unsteady, his face pale. He stood beside Vincent Ashford, this 14-year-old boy next to this billionaire, and the contrast was stark. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent began, his voice smooth and authoritative. We've reviewed the performance. The crowd was so quiet you could hear people breathing. The judges have evaluated based on classical performance standards, Vincent continued. He paused, letting the tension build, enjoying this moment of complete control. And found? Another pause cruelly long. Multiple technical errors. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Angela Williams' face fell, her hand flying to her mouth. Zara looked confused, not understanding what was happening. Malik's fists clenched. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Jayden's eyes closed. He'd known. Deep down he'd known. The cadenza hadn't been perfect. The transition in the 7th minute had stumbled. He'd made mistakes. According to the terms of our agreement, Vincent said, and now his smile was returning, that cruel, satisfied smile. The performance was not perfect. The gymnasium erupted in protest from half the crowd. Reverend Thompson stood up, shouting. The church choir was on their feet. But Vincent's supporters were nodding, satisfied. The rules were the rules. Therefore, Vincent began. Mr. Ashford, I need to say something. Dr. Patricia Morrison was standing up. Without waiting for permission, without being invited, she walked onto the stage, heading straight for the microphone. Vincent's smile faltered. Dr. Morrison, I'm in the middle of. And I'm interrupting, she said firmly. She gently but definitively took the microphone from his hand. She turned to face the crowd, her 70-year-old face stern and dignified. My name is Dr. Patricia Morrison. I've been a professional pianist for 35 years. I've performed in Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, and concert halls around the world. I've heard Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 performed hundreds of times by trained professionals with decades of experience. The gymnasium was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Expectant. Hopeful. What this young man did tonight, Dr. Morrison continued, her voice growing stronger, should not have been possible. The piece itself is designed to showcase the absolute peak of piano virtuosity. Professional pianists train for years, sometimes decades, before attempting it. And even then many fail. She turned to look at Jayden, and her expression softened. This boy had 48 hours. No formal training. No conservatory education. No private instructors. Just raw talent, determination, and apparently a very good music teacher. Mrs. Chen in the audience put her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Yes, we marked errors on our scorecards, Dr. Morrison said, turning back to the audience. Minor timing variations. Missed grace notes. Chord progressions that weren't executed with complete technical precision. But let me be clear about what those errors represent. They represent a 14-year-old child attempting the impossible and coming closer than anyone had any right to expect. Vincent tried to interrupt. Dr. Morrison, we had specific terms. She cut him off, her voice sharp now. You made a 14-year-old boy perform an impossible task for your entertainment. You set him up to fail, chose one of the most difficult pieces in existence, gave him 2 days to learn it and expected perfection. But he didn't fail. He did the impossible. The audience erupted in applause. Not polite applause. Thunderous applause. People were on their feet again, shouting their agreement. Dr. Morrison raised her hand for silence. The soul of that performance, the interpretation, the raw talent, that was perfect. More than perfect. That was the kind of music that reminds us why we become musicians in the first place. She looked directly at Vincent Ashford. I'm changing my vote. He wins. The gymnasium exploded with noise. Cheering. Applause. Shouting. The third judge stood up. I concur. He wins. 2-1. The majority vote was clear. Vincent's face went red with fury. You can't just, this isn't how this works. We had a contract. Specific terms. You can't change the rules because you got emotional. We're not changing the rules, Dr. Morrison said calmly. We're interpreting them with common sense and humanity. Something you apparently lack. The crowd was chanting now. Pay him. Pay him. Pay him. He earned it. Honor the bet. Vincent grabbed the microphone back, his composure finally cracking. This is my event. My donation. My bet. I make the final decision. The chaos in the gymnasium was reaching a fever pitch. News cameras were capturing everything. Vincent's PR team was in full panic mode, trying to figure out how to spin this disaster. Principal Harrington was literally wringing his hands, desperate to restore order but powerless to do so. Vincent stood at the microphone, his face twisted with anger, about to declare that Jayden had lost anyway, that it was his bet and his rules and what he said went. And then the doors at the back of the gymnasium opened. Federal agents entered. 6 of them wearing FBI windbreakers, their expressions serious and professional. The crowd fell silent again, confused now. What was happening? Leading the agents was a woman in a sharp dark suit, her FBI credentials hanging around her neck on a lanyard. She walked down the center aisle with purpose, her eyes locked on Vincent Ashford. Mr. Vincent Ashford? She called out. Vincent turned, his anger replaced by confusion. What is this? The agent reached the stage, climbed the steps, and pulled out a folded document. I'm Special Agent Sarah Kim, FBI. You're being served with a federal warrant. She handed him the papers. Investigation into securities fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering, Agent Kim announced, her voice carrying across the silent gymnasium. Your assets, including your business accounts, are frozen pending investigation. The crowd gasped. News cameras swung toward Vincent, capturing his face as it went from confusion to shock to fear. This is absurd. Vincent stammered. I'm a respected businessman. You can't just. You're a criminal who's been under investigation for 14 months, Agent Kim said flatly. We've been building our case, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to move forward. She gestured around the gymnasium. Then you decided to publicly humiliate a child on national television. Seemed like good timing to us. Vincent's lawyer was pushing through the crowd now, but Agent Kim kept talking. A whistleblower from your company contacted us 6 months ago. We've been documenting everything. The securities fraud, the tax evasion schemes, the shell companies, the racketeering. It's all there. She pointed to the check that had been written for $2 million, sitting on a table near the stage. That check. Written from an account that's now frozen. Even if this young man won your little bet, you couldn't pay him. The whole thing was a scam. A publicity stunt. You never intended to honor it. The gymnasium erupted again. The media was going crazy. People were shouting. Vincent's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time on national television. This is a mistake. Vincent protested. I'll sue. This is harassment. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Kim said, pulling out handcuffs. I suggest you use it. Brandon Ashford, Vincent's son, tried to slip out a side door. But another agent was there, blocking his exit. Brandon Ashford? We have some questions for you too. About your father's offshore accounts. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Vincent Ashford was handcuffed. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck, still protesting, still insisting this was all a mistake. I know people. I have lawyers. You can't do this to me. We already did, Agent Kim said simply. They led him down the center aisle, past all the people who'd come to watch a 14-year-old boy be humiliated, and out the doors. The billionaire in handcuffs, still protesting, still unable to believe that he wasn't untouchable. And just like that, Vincent Ashford was gone. The gymnasium descended into chaos. People were talking over each other, filming, trying to understand what had just happened. News anchors were doing live updates. Students were calling their parents. Faculty members looked shell-shocked. Jayden stood on the stage completely overwhelmed. He hadn't won the money. But he hadn't lost either. Vincent Ashford was being arrested for fraud. Nothing made sense. Dr. Morrison approached him through the chaos, her face kind. Jayden, she said, and waited for him to focus on her. I teach at Berklee College of Music in Boston. It's one of the premier music schools in the world. Jayden nodded numbly, not understanding why she was telling him this. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship, Dr. Morrison continued. Room, board, private instruction, everything. When you graduate high school, if you want it, the spot is yours. Jayden's mouth opened but no sound came out. A full scholarship to Berklee. One of the best music schools in the world. The kind of place he'd never even let himself dream about. Before he could respond, another couple approached. Emma's parents, wealthy donors to youth music programs, people who actually used their money to help others. Jayden, Emma's father said, we'd like to fund your education until college. Private piano instruction, music theory, whatever you need. And if you want to go to Juilliard instead of Berklee, we'll fund that too. Emma's mother smiled warmly. Consider it an investment in actual talent, not ego. Mrs. Chin appeared, pulling Jayden into a tight hug, both of them crying now. Someone in the crowd shouted, the video has 10 million views already. It was true. The performance had been live-streamed. The viral video from 2 days ago had prepared the ground, and now this, Jayden's actual performance, the confrontation with Vincent Ashford, the FBI arrest, it was everywhere. 10 million views and climbing fast. The comments were pouring in. Messages of support from around the world. Musicians praising his performance. People outraged at Vincent Ashford's cruelty. And donations. Someone had started a GoFundMe for the Williams family. In the chaos of the last hour, while Jayden was performing and the FBI was arresting Vincent Ashford, that GoFundMe had raised $500,000. $500,000 from strangers who believed in Jayden, who wanted to help, who saw injustice and decided to do something about it. Angela Williams pushed through the crowd and onto the stage, Zara right behind her. Mother and son collapsed into each other's arms, both sobbing. Zara wrapped her small arms around both of them, her yellow dress wrinkled now but her smile as bright as the sun. Malik and Emma were there too, pulling Jayden into a group hug. Reverend Thompson and the entire church choir surrounded them, creating a protective circle around this boy who just experienced the most overwhelming night of his life. The news cameras captured all of it. The joy. The tears. The community coming together. This was the real story. Not a billionaire's cruel bet, but a community supporting one of their own. If you've watched this entire story, then you know you need to subscribe right now. Because stories like this, stories about real people overcoming impossible odds, these are the stories that matter. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you never miss another one. 1 week later, the epilogue began to unfold. The news reports came in steadily. Vincent Ashford had been formally charged with securities fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial was swift. 15 years in federal prison. His company was dissolved, his assets seized, his reputation destroyed completely. But there was more. A judge, reviewing the case and the viral videos of what Vincent had done to Jayden, made a ruling. $2 million from the recovered funds would be awarded to Jayden Williams as restitution. Vincent Ashford would pay his bet after all, though he'd be paying it from prison. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The money Vincent had offered as a cruel joke, never intending to pay, would now go to exactly where he'd promised it would. Jayden accepted the full scholarship to Berklee College of Music, but deferred enrollment to finish high school. He wanted to graduate from Ashford Academy. Wanted to prove he belonged there not because of charity, but because he'd earned it. But he didn't keep all that money for himself. With the $2 million from the court and the $500,000 from the GoFundMe, Jayden did something remarkable. He started giving back. He began offering free piano lessons at the East Side Community Center. Every day after school, kids from his neighborhood, kids who could never afford private lessons, kids who'd never touched a piano before, would come to learn. And that Steinway Model D? The beautiful grand piano that had started all of this? Ashford Academy tried to return it to Vincent's company after his arrest, but the company was in receivership, being liquidated to pay back defrauded investors. The liquidators, moved by Jayden's story and wanting some good to come from the mess, donated the piano to the East Side Community Center. So the $175,000 Steinway found a new home. Not in a wealthy private school where only privileged students could access it, but in a community center in the projects where anyone could play it. The final scene of this story takes place 3 months after that fateful performance. Jayden sat at that Steinway in the community center, surrounded by a group of 15 kids ranging in age from 6 to 16. They were all different races, different backgrounds, all eager to learn. Some had shown natural talent. Others were still struggling with basic scales. But all of them were there because they wanted to be, because music spoke to something inside them. Zara sat in the front row, healthy now thanks to the better medical care the family could finally afford. Her chronic condition was under control. She smiled up at her brother with that same absolute faith she'd always had. Angela Williams stood in the doorway watching. She'd been able to quit 2 of her 3 jobs. She still worked as a nursing assistant because she loved it, but the killing pace, the exhaustion, the constant stress, that was finally over. She could breathe. Mrs. Chin visited regularly, bringing sheet music, offering advice, watching Jayden transform from student to teacher with pride that made her think of her own mother. On this particular afternoon, Jayden wasn't teaching Rachmaninoff. He wasn't teaching the difficult, complex pieces that had almost broken him. He was teaching something simple. A folk song. Something joyful and accessible that all the kids could learn together. He played and the kids clapped along, some of them singing, all of them fully engaged. This was what music was supposed to be. Not a weapon used by the wealthy to humiliate the poor. Not a test designed to make people fail. But a joy. A connection. A universal language that belonged to everyone. The camera would pull back, showing the full community center. On the building outside, a new sign had been installed, Williams Music Program where everyone belongs. Funded by the viral donations, supported by the community, open to anyone who wanted to learn. The final shot would focus on Jayden's hands on the keys of that Steinway. Those hands that Vincent Ashford had called laborer's hands. Those hands that weren't supposed to create beauty, that weren't supposed to be capable of greatness. Those hands creating music that filled the room with light. And as the scene faded to black, text would appear on the screen. Talent doesn't care about your zip code. Opportunity should work the same way. But this isn't just a story about Jayden Williams. This is a story that happens every single day in different forms all across the world. Talented kids who never get opportunities because they were born in the wrong neighborhood. Gifted students who never get chances because they don't have the right connections. People with extraordinary abilities who never get to show what they can do because the system was designed to keep them out. Jayden's story went viral because it touched something universal. The desire to see justice done. The hope that talent and hard work can overcome systemic barriers. The belief that people like Vincent Ashford, who use their wealth and power to hurt others, will eventually face consequences. But the real story isn't about Vincent Ashford getting arrested or Jayden winning money. The real story is about a community that came together. About a teacher who saw talent and nurtured it. About a mother who worked herself to exhaustion to give her children a chance. About a young man who refused to be defined by other people's limitations. 3 months after the performance, Jayden gave his first real concert. Not in a fancy concert hall, but in his neighborhood church. The same church where Reverend Thompson preached every Sunday, where the choir had come to support him. He played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 again. But this time he wasn't playing it to prove anything to anyone. He wasn't playing it for money or to save his scholarship or to satisfy a cruel bet. He was playing it because he loved it, because it was beautiful, because music was his voice and he finally had the freedom to speak. The church was packed. People from the neighborhood. His former teachers. Students from Ashford Academy, not the cruel ones but the ones who'd been quietly supportive all along. Emma played violin accompaniment. Mrs. Chin sat in the front row, her mother's spirit somehow present in the music. And when Jayden finished, when the last chord faded into silence, the applause wasn't about winning or losing. It was about witnessing something genuine. Something true. Dr. Morrison, who'd flown in from Boston specifically for the concert, approached him afterward. "That was even better than the first time," she said. "Do you know why?" Jayden shook his head. "Because this time you were playing for the right reasons. Music isn't about perfection. It's not about proving you're better than someone else or winning bets. It's about expression, connection, truth." She smiled. "That's what I'm going to teach you at Berkeley. Not how to play perfectly. How to play honestly." As the months went on, the Williams music program grew. What started with 15 kids expanded to 50, then 100. Donations kept coming in. Professional musicians volunteered their time to teach. The program offered not just piano but violin, guitar, voice, music theory. Other community centers started reaching out, wanting to create similar programs. The movement spread. Music education for kids who couldn't afford it. Opportunities for talent that might otherwise go undiscovered. Jayden became a symbol, though he never quite got comfortable with that role. He was just a kid who loved music and wanted others to have the same chances he'd fought for. Vincent Ashford became a cautionary tale. Business schools studied his case as an example of fraud. Ethics classes discussed his treatment of Jayden as an example of how the wealthy exploit the vulnerable. His name became synonymous with cruelty and corruption. Brandon Ashford was charged as an accessory in his father's financial crimes. He ended up serving 3 years in a minimum security prison and, by all accounts, came out a different person. He publicly apologized to Jayden, though Jayden never responded. Some wounds don't need to be addressed. Some apologies don't need to be accepted. Principal Harrington was quietly encouraged to retire early. The board of Ashford Academy, embarrassed by how the situation had been handled, brought in new leadership committed to actual equity and inclusion, not just the appearance of it. Mrs. Chin retired at the end of that school year, having taught for 41 years. Her final act was to give her mother's baby grand piano to Jayden. Not to the Williams music program, but to Jayden personally for his home. "My mother would want you to have this," she said. "You honored her piano and her memory. Keep playing. Keep teaching. Keep proving that talent and character matter more than money and privilege." The piano found a place in the Williams' new apartment. Yes, they moved out of the projects into a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom place where Zara had her own room and Angela could finally sleep without worrying about making rent. But Jayden still went back to the community center every day to teach. He never forgot where he came from. As for the question of whether Jayden's performance was perfect, the answer depends on what you mean by perfect. Technically? No. There were errors, mistakes, imperfections that any trained ear could identify. But in every way that actually matters, it was flawless. It was honest. It was passionate. It was the sound of a young man refusing to be broken, refusing to accept the limitations others placed on him, refusing to believe that his worth was determined by his zip code or his bank account or the color of his skin. That's the kind of perfection that actually matters. Not hitting every note correctly, but having the courage to play your song even when the whole world is watching, waiting for you to fail. Years later, when Jayden Williams performed at Carnegie Hall, and yes, that day came, reporters would ask him about the Vincent Ashford incident. About the bet, the viral video, the impossible odds. And Jayden would smile and say, "That wasn't about Vincent Ashford. That was never about him. That was about proving to myself that I belonged in spaces that weren't designed for people like me. That was about honoring everyone who believed in me when it would have been easier to doubt. That was about music, and music doesn't care who your parents are or where you're from. Music just cares if you have something to say." And then he would play. Because that's what musicians do. They play their truth, they share their voice, and they remind the world that beauty can come from anywhere as long as we're willing to listen. Here's my final question for you. What's your impossible dream? What's the thing you want to do but you've been told you can't, that it's too hard, that people like you don't get those opportunities? Drop it in the comments. Because maybe your story is next. Maybe you're the next person who needs to prove that talent and determination matter more than privilege and connection. This is the end of Jayden Williams' story. But it's also just the beginning. Because every single day, somewhere in the world, there's another kid sitting at a broken piano in a community center, dreaming of something bigger. Another student being told they don't belong. Another person with extraordinary talent who just needs someone to believe in them. The question is, will we be the ones who believe? Will we be the Mrs. Chens who offer our resources? The Dr. Morrisons who change our votes? The Emma Rodriguezes who show up with our violins to help? The communities that come together to lift someone up? Or will we be the Vincent Ashfords, using our power to tear people down, creating impossible tests designed for failure, treating human beings as entertainment? The choice is ours. Jayden Williams chose courage. He chose music. He chose to believe in himself even when the odds were impossible. What will you choose? Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for caring about Jayden and his family and everyone who fought for him. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that one person can make a difference, then share it. Tell someone else. Let Jayden's story inspire someone else to chase their impossible dream. Because talent doesn't care about your zip code. An opportunity should work the same way.